May 13th, 2025 was a massive day for fight news. We got a bunch of different announcements from Dana White, the big man himself, and I got behind schedule with the upload of the fight predictions video for the card happening this Saturday, so I wasn't able to talk about this the day of, but better late than never, you know? There was never going to be an instance where I was just going to let all of this news go by me and not cover any of it. So we're going to talk about things that happened yesterday, like 317. We pretty much have the entire fight card for International Fight Week that we can go and look at this point. 319 is also back on. This card hasn't been built yet, but we do have a main event, which is going to be Derrick du Plessis versus Chimaev. The main event of UFC 317 is going to be Ilia Topuria versus Charles Oliveira for the vacant lightweight title. Islam versus JDM is going to for sure happen because yesterday Islam marked the end of his title run at lightweight by giving up the belt to go and challenge at 170. So tomorrow I'm going to make a video comparing the title runs of Khabib Nurmagomedov and his cousin Islam Makhachev to see who had the better legacy and by how much. But right now we're going to talk about these fights. So first we're going to go over the Chicago rap beef that's happening at welterweight. That boy Islam Makhachev is about to slide for Belal Muhammad. The organization went back on their word. Before they had said that Islam will not vacate regardless of the outcome of Belal versus JDM. And then yesterday, they immediately retracted that statement and Islam vacates so that he can go up to challenge for 170. That's what it's going to look like in the middle. This is a very good Photoshop of JDM and Islam faced off right before the fight starts. The shadows are a little bit, inconsistent, so you can tell it's not real. What I'm really still focused on, though, is Topuria versus Makhachev. That's the fight that I really want to see. And it's not impossible at this point. Both fighters just have to be perfect against some pretty difficult tests for the next 1.5 to maybe 2 years before this fight can go down. Islam may successfully collect Belal Muhammad's reboot card, but this is a grindy fight where Islam likely doesn't just get to do whatever he wants. JDM is a very large welterweight. Islam is a big lightweight, but he is going to have the frame of a 155er more so than he will the frame of a 170 pounder. Wrestling will be the great equalizer in this fight, and he has nothing to prove as a striker at this new weight class, so he will be shooting a lot more takedowns than Belal Muhammad did. Even though he chose not to and was capable of doing them, Islam is going to come out with the game plan that we thought would beat JDM out of Belal Muhammad, and he might get this one done. One thing that I want to make note of, though, is how even though Belal Muhammad didn't wrestle very often in his fight with JDM, he still did go for some double legs, and he was all the way in on JDM's hips and on these takedowns as well. And he locked his hands behind JDM's hips, and for some reason, he couldn't finish the takedowns. JDM's base was very wide and he stayed very strong with the underhooks. Belal Muhammad was just slipping his grip right off of JDM's back and his hands were becoming unlocked. Or he would get too high to finish the takedown and just have to bail on it every time. So there is a possibility that Islam cannot take down JDM. For whatever reason, his takedown defense is so good, it may be better than Islam's wrestling. And if it's not, he may have the edge in being able to stuff the shots just because of the fact that he is going to be bigger than Islam. So we have to watch out for that. And that is a real possibility, that the wrestling is just impossible for Islam and he has to take this fight on the feet as a striker. And we've seen the way that boxers who have good takedown defense gave Makhachev problems in the past at lightweight. Volk wasn't even a lightweight, he was a featherweight, but he has good takedown defense and also is a good striker with his boxing. Dustin Poirier, he didn't really do much about the takedowns later on in the fight once he started to fatigue, but in the open range with the boxing, he was landing some really good shots on Islam and he opened his face up. And Volk did the same thing in their first fight. So Jack Della Maddalena can get close, man, and he can do some real damage here. I'm pretty salty about the fact that Islam versus Topuria isn't what we're immediately targeting, but I get it. Islam wants to build his own legacy, and he's trying to stop people from claiming that he only beats up featherweights by being the one who punches up this time, instead of taking a challenge from a lower weight class or fighting a lightweight who's an ex-featherweight. People are always going to nitpick at this guy's resume, even though he has some of the best defenses in lightweight. Jack Della Maddalena is coming at this from the angle of vengeance, though, as well. Just as Islam wants to avenge Belal Muhammad, JDM is pretty fired up to get this one back for Volk. And I know this because he actually did say, I'm gonna get him back for Volk, and this was in his post-fight interview. So that's what he's challenging for. And his own legacy as well. And speaking of JDM's legacy related to this fight, he has a very special opportunity. The quality of the champions at 170 have been evolving in a straight line going this way ever since Woodley. You could even say this, I guess, for Robbie Lawler before him too, because Woodley was a better fighter than Robbie Lawler. Robbie Lawler had a better career because he made better decisions for it, but Woodley was a better fighter, and each champion after the next one was a better fighter than the one who held the belt before him. So that's what you want to see out of this sport. JDM actually is an evolution of champions in the welterweight division. He's a great boxer, the best in the UFC probably, and that's why it makes it interesting for him to have the prospect of fighting Islam, who is the biggest win that any fighter can have on their resume. His only UFC loss is to Pantoja, for crying out loud. JDM has the opportunity to be recognized as a better champion than 95% of all welterweight title holders by winning his first defense, just because of the quality of this opponent. Usman had what was the greatest title run of any modern champion post-GSP, and JDM's legacy will be comparable to Usman's. It might even cut his in half if it's a brutal knockout over Islam Makhachev that we end up watching, with all the things that he's accomplished, because Usman had Burns, he had Covington a couple of times, and also Masvidal twice. And dude, Makhachev is a better win than all three of those fighters and I just named combined, even if he beat them a couple of times each. If he sleeps out Islam, that will make him the lineal #1 pound for pound, and it would place him in the top 5 of the actual rankings list. And this is like guaranteed. I think he's number 9 right now. He would actually maybe become the #1 pound for pound fighter. Islam is arrogant, and I'd like to see him lose for the fact that he will likely act very sure of his victory going into this fight. And he'll dig up old phrases like, Australia has no wrestling, that he was trying to prod at Volk with. And he'll talk about fighting in the street, while Jack is just going to be in the gym putting forth the same level of preparation that made it so he could go and put on this 5-round war with Belal Muhammad post a 1.5-year layoff. I feel like people over time are going to come to realize how impressive that victory was. If JDM wins, he becomes Rudy. There's an American film about a football player named Rudy who worked in like a steel mill, and then he became a Notre Dame football running back and was the hometown hero by the end of it. JDM has the potential to win Good Guy of the Year if he knocks out Islam Makhachev and is humble in his victory about it. All he has to do is carry himself the same way that he did after he beat Belal, and he's just going to keep on getting more fans. There's not really a whole lot to JDM, it seems like, from the perspective of, this guy's going to get into it with other fighters at the Fighter Hotel or talk a lot ahead at a press conference. He's just there to fight, and he's always going to deliver us a good fight. And that's what he talks about. I think he did an Ariel Awani interview where he said, I don't really care about the belt. The fights are what matter to me. So his motivation to work is the work itself. And that's why he is such a good champion, because he is so salt of the earth. I love Jack Della Maddalena, and I have really liked him for a long time. This is a good fighter. This is my champion. And now we're going to talk about Charles versus Ilia for the vacant title. Charles fans just glaze his career highlights and don't acknowledge any of the deficiencies of him as a fighter. If we're looking at the stats by the books, they do support Charles Oliveira is the best submission finisher in the UFC. But in his fights, this is not true. And if it were, he would not have been choked out by Islam the way that he was. He could have just safely laid in his guard. Islam wouldn't even have been trying to get inside of his full guard because he would have been too threatened by it. And he would have got Islam and Arman on the ground if he was what people say he is, man. I'm not going to ever say that this guy just sucks. But we've seen the skill ceiling that he's demonstrated, and it's fun to support him, and it's emotional when he wins because you go through a lot and he goes through a lot. Charles is really a fighter who we're just watching develop a receding hairline and lose his bag, while people are just denying that he's becoming washed, and this is all because he's a beloved fighter. I'm sick of Charles getting the Aura Farm and exists in our good graces after 2 horrible losses he redeemed with victories over Beneil Dariush and a Chandler rematch. In the Chandler rematch, I mean, dude, if you want to hold Chandler 2 and Chandler 1 side by side, Chandler 2 felt like it was the Walmart version of Chandler 1. Chandler 1, you can't follow that up with a rematch. Especially since that fight didn't even make sense, because what had Chandler done in between losing that title shot and then coming back to rematch with Charles in order to make that fight actually purposeful? Holloway and Volkanovski by flatline KO. And there was no war before the finish. These were not close fights. Ilia pulled up and slept both of them with no problem. And there were belts on the line. And Max Holloway was the BMF champion. And Dana White had to make concessions for Max Holloway to hold the BMF belt, even though Ilia Topuria is the BMF champion because he knocked out the BMF champion. And then Dana White's going to move the goalpost after the fight and be like, well, this was actually just a title fight. It wasn't for the BMF belt. Max Holloway is still the BMF champion, even though we just watched him get slapped by Ilia Topuria. So what does that make him? I feel like this whole guy's career, since he's trying to pace himself, he's just been getting slighted. And the fans don't acknowledge how good he is. And they go off of namesake. And Charles Oliveira is going to beat him because I know who Charles Oliveira is and who is Ilia Topuria. Even though he's just knocked out two of the greatest fighters to ever put on gloves in the UFC. I was going to say featherweights, just as a generalization. No. Volkanovski and Max Holloway are two of the greatest fighters to ever put on gloves in the UFC. And Ilia Topuria sparked both of them out. And it was not a competitive fight. Charles is the guy who we know gets hurt in all of his fights, and people still want to act like Ilia Topuria is going to be the one who's going in over his head in this fight, just because he's 5'8" and coming in a little undersized. And it's not even really like that, because you see that video of him sprinting. He's a hulking tank now. It's not going to be difficult for him at all. He's going to knock Charles Oliveira out so bad. And then he's going to sip his little tea and put on his glasses. I can't stress this enough. Between Makhachev and Ilia Topuria, I mentioned that these fighters had to be perfect in order for their fight to take place in the future. Islam has a greater risk of messing up the potential prospects of both of them being able to sign on to that fight as undefeated fighters than Ilia does. Ilia, I think, will handle his challenges and maintain champion status until he can line up a fight with Makhachev. Makhachev doing all this challenging of JDM and stuff and going up to welterweight, he may get his ass knocked out. I think that Ilia's got this, man. So he's going to become champion in International Fight Week of a new division. He won't be champ, but in my mind, he will be. That is going to be a guy who I will talk about with the likes of Daniel Cormier and Amanda Nunes and Conor McGregor and John Jones. I'm going to be talking about Ilia Topuria with these great fighters, these generational Mount Rushmore fighters, dude. This dude is such a savage. I could see him following Islam to the next weight class and vacating the second belt if Islam doesn't return to challenge Ilia. Granted, they both win their fights. If Islam goes up to challenge JDM and he chokes that guy out, Darce choke round 2, whatever, Ilia fights Charles Oliveira round 1 KO like I'm thinking it's going to happen. I think that if Islam decides that he doesn't want to go back down to 155 and actually is ducking, Topuria is going to give up that belt and he's going to chase Islam through another division and he's going to retire another title. Because he'll be the champion. He can do that. If that's just an option that they're presenting to people now. There's no way that Islam gets out of fighting Topuria if he wins and Islam wins. The fans will demand it, is the reason why this fight will happen then at that point. Because Ilia will need to actually become the organization's greatest athlete on paper in order for the UFC to force Islam to fight Ilia. Islam is their golden boy, and for a good reason. He's carried the promotion for a long time. He's the biggest draw to all, like, actual fight fans. We all really care about watching what Islam Makhachev does, just because he doesn't lose. He is so dominant. And you just care about what he does because of the prospects of him maybe losing, or if you are a fan of his, you just want to see him dominate. And if he doesn't dominate and it's a close fight, you're watching see him have a fight with one of the greatest fighters in the world where he wins. But my point is that Topuria isn't a big enough draw yet for the UFC to be pressuring Islam to take this fight for their purposes of making money. Because with the win over Charles Oliveira, if Topuria just is himself on the mic for this last time in the new division to become its champion again, he's going to get fans. So this is going to be a massive fight. Especially if we're talking then about Islam Makhachev doing his thing at 170, vacating that belt to go back down to 155, and then becoming champion again like he never left. He would become then maybe one of the sport's greatest athletes, and I'll have done something that nobody's done before. This is going to be uncharted territory for any champion in the UFC, what both of them are doing. Both of these fighters find themselves in positions that are unlike anything that any other fighter has been able to achieve. It feels like a lot of different double champ fights were thrown together kind of by the seat of the organization's pants and not fully planned out because of the fact that what ended up happening to these champions and these belts whenever the fighters moved away from the sport or back to their weight classes, it ends up leaving like a rift. And it seems like prior to the way that they're making fighters do it now, that they didn't really think much about the way that this was supposed to look as far as fighters going up to challenge at a new weight class. I do actually like the idea of them entering new divisions as contenders. And then, they might get immediate title shots, but it's not like, oh yeah, this guy already has a belt and like he's just going to be walking around with gold and nobody can do anything about it no matter what he does here. And if he loses, he just goes back and he's the champion. Like, this raises the stakes now. Like, you have to win this fight or else you're just a guy in the UFC. I mean, not really. You're still the greatest fighter in the world, but the timing of this opportunity coming for Islam is... It makes sense. Granted, I just said what I said. I mean, you can understand it. It doesn't really make sense. But if he does wait, say like 8 months, and then, we get like the Ilia Topuria fight. He fights 8 months, hard fight. He wins, but he takes some damage. So, maybe a year layoff for Islam, because he did wait a while to come back and fight Renato Moicano after the Dustin Poirier fight. So if he takes that same layoff, there's a chance that JDM may not be there waiting for him with the belt. This effort kind of loses meaning for him to go up to 170 if it's not JDM. So the reason as to why he's choosing now above any other time to go and challenge for the belt, I think it makes sense personally. Islam's got a lot of smart people around him. They're making good decisions on his behalf. This is what he wants to do, and they're making sure that he's doing it intelligently. So we're going to get the fight. It'll be handled responsibly on the UFC's end as well. But once Topuria becomes champion of his old division, then he can make call-outs. And the fans are going to criticize Islam for ducking, just like they criticized John Jones for ducking Tom Aspinall. Topuria's job is pretty simple. All he has to do is go into the octagon on International Fight Week and knock out a guy who has no chin and whose grappling probably isn't significantly better than his own. So if he can do that, which seems like a pretty not big ask on paper, he's unbelievably goated. But if he loses and somehow finds a way to sell the bag here, this is going to be a great shame for him. Even with everything that he's accomplished, he can't be this guy who bets all in on himself every time and then take a loss and be like, oh yeah guys, well I came up short this time, but I'll be back. Nobody's going to really hear that out of him now after he's saying all the things that he plans on doing, and now he hasn't lied up until this point. This guy's like Akinator, like the phone app where he knows everything. As far as it comes to his own destiny, this guy's calling all of his shots. And I respect it a lot, so I want to see him go far. My money is definitely on him over Oliveira, my hypothetical money. But now we're going to talk about Dricus du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev at UFC 319. Oh my god. I think the date is August 16th on this one. I'm calling it now. This is going to be one of the best fights in this division's history. Dricus du Plessis has already put on 2 classics with Sean Strickland and a banger fight with Israel Adesanya. That's another classic, man. This is going to be an unstoppable force versus an immovable object. Khamzat will rush from the start and try to intimidate Dricus with his rapid pace and aggression, but Dricus will not fold up and he will muscle back into Khamzat, and we're going to find out who's more physically strong between the two of them whenever they fight. And I'm so excited to see this arm wrestling match between King Kong versus Godzilla. Dricus may crush Chimaev because of the fact that Khamzat struggles in the striking in general. I feel like his entire offense is just a bunch of 1-2s and hooks inside. And his only tool to win a fight is with his dominant wrestling. Whenever he's able to really pull away, it's just him beating the crap out of someone in like a takedown sequence and getting them on the floor, doing more damage and then wrapping up a sub. And that's why he's so good. But I think that DDP is going to be way too big for him to just ragdoll. And he's too good at striking to get broken down by Khamzat's skill set. I would call it adept. I wouldn't say he's a master of striking. He's definitely powerful and he knows what he's doing. But it's nothing very creative or inventive out of him. It's just boxing. Some leg kicks, but just boxing. DDP has outstruck Strickland and Izzy. The best striker that Chimaev fought was Whitaker, and he didn't even strike with that guy. He just took him down immediately. And all of the impressive wins that Chimaev has are over either fighters who came from welterweight or are actually welterweight, since he dipped his toes in those waters for a little bit whenever he could actually make that weight. Dricus du Plessis, he might have fought at welterweight in the early part of his career, but this is a true 185er. If this guy ever tried to cut down to welterweight like Khamzat Chimaev was able to do on occasions past, that would actually make Dricus du Plessis not live anymore if he tried to make that weight cut. So this is a big fella, and he's not just going to be able to just like pick him up like Li Jingliang and go and talk to Dana White and throw him on the ground like a baby and then punch him a few times and then wrap up an RNC. I'm thinking at least, dude. If it goes just like that, I'm going to have to pick up my jaw and wrap it around my neck. It's going to be so far extended onto the ground. So because of the fact that, I mean, Khamzat Chimaev is coming in here with some smaller man skill, but I think that his skill set only really works to the degree that we've seen it be incredibly effective on guys who are smaller than he is or are not middleweights. I don't think that you can do that to a lot of middleweights, especially if you give the middleweight high tier wrestling and jiu-jitsu too. So I think that Khamzat Chimaev is going to hit a wall. For some reason, for all this fight promises, in my head, I do not think we're getting a war. I think that Dricus likely just gets Khamzat to spend all of his energy through the first 3 rounds of this fight, if it does go that deep, and he wins much more easily than people think that this fight goes. I think that Dricus du Plessis is just so well conditioned. I don't think that he's going to get caught with anything because he's defensively responsible. And that goes for his grappling too. So whenever they get to the ground, he's going to be scrambling. It's going to look ridiculous watching Khamzat Chimaev try to power grapple Dricus du Plessis because we're going to see how large du Plessis is compared to Khamzat Chimaev. They're going to be around the same stature, but Dricus du Plessis is just going to have more muscles on him. So in bottom positions, I wouldn't be surprised to see Dricus du Plessis just repeatedly get butterfly guards or something and just kick Khamzat Chimaev's hips right off of him. If that space is able to be created, he might just get his back ridden the whole time. We'll see how this fight goes, man. I'm very excited. I think that those odds are criminal, though. Dricus du Plessis at plus 120 is... Load the boat, fellas. Load the boat. Talking about all of this, like, Solana and stuff. Nah, man. Dricus du Plessis at plus 120. I'm about to make so much money on Smash Coin and this Dricus du Plessis play. This was the fight that I really cared about anyways. Whenever we lost this at UFC 317, all I really cared is that this fight was going to go down regardless. They were talking about Caio Borralho stepping in for Dricus du Plessis and then fighting Khamzat Chimaev. As far as Khamzat Chimaev getting the test and seeing if he could grapple with an actual middleweight, that would have been interesting, but I don't want to see that, dude. I want to see this. So I'm glad that we got it. Super interesting fight. The last one that we're going to talk about, it's going to be a Derrick Lewis main event in 2025. In the big 2025, man. For everyone who got excited about this, I feel like Mr. Krabs in this picture, man. Like, how do I tell him? That's you. You're SpongeBob sitting at the desk. If you got excited whenever you saw this headline that Derrick Lewis is going to fight Talison Tejera on July 12th in Nashville, and this is headlining the card, I'm Mr. Krabs talking about you to Squidward. And Squidward is the rest of the viewer base that understands that this is not okay. What is Derrick Lewis doing, man? Talison Tejera, the reason why I'm even talking about this, because if it was just some fat guy in heavyweight, I would just dismiss it. I would be like, all right, Derrick Lewis is just going to get this one up out the mud like he always does. But Talison Tejera actually is kind of like a heavyweight. He's not like crazy jacked, but he's very big. He's a tall guy, you know? And he has explosive power and one-shot KO ability. He moves a lot faster than Derrick Lewis does. Derrick Lewis loads up and heaves big shots at people who aren't fast enough to move out of the way of the telegraphing. Talison Tejera's got some moves on him. Maybe this is the UFC throwing Derrick Lewis a retirement party, putting his fight with Talison Tejera on a main event. But this has the potential to always just be a Derrick Lewis decision as well, which is an ass fight where both fighters are afraid to get knocked out, him and whoever else he's fighting with. So, great events, dude. Other stuff got announced, like Beneil Dariush versus Nato Moicano. Other fights too, but they're on upcoming cards. So I'll just save those predictions for whenever I'm breaking down the full list of fights for that event. Thank you guys so much for sticking around to this point in the video. If you did, please like, comment, and subscribe. I will be back for more content uploaded tomorrow. So check in with me. Have a nice day, everyone. Peace out.